Okay, welcome everyone to our third Community Advisory Group meeting for the Washington State Ferries Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal Project. My name is Hadley Rodero. I'm with Washington State Ferries. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for this project. We've got a lot of folks joining us tonight, so I'm just going to give a minute and kind of start slowly while we let everyone log on and get situated. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm excited to share with everyone what we've been up to for the last few months since this group met last at the end of July. I also want to welcome all the community members who are joining us tonight in the audience. For those of you attending in the audience, we do not have the chat box live today, but you'll be in listen only mode for the meeting. If you have comments or questions that you want to share with us or with members of the CAG, we invite you to send them to our project inbox, and which is the email address that we will show on the screen here, fauntleroytermproj@wash.wa.gov. And Laura's going to pop that in the chat too, so you have it there if you want to refer to it. That also applies to you, members of our community advisory group. If you think of a longer thought during the meeting, as you know, you can always send us an email and share that with us. The community advisory group does receive a log of all public comments ahead of each meeting. They received that last week. So everything that we hear, we share with our advisory group members so they can hear what members of their communities are saying and everyone's thoughts about the project. Just as a reminder, these meetings are recorded and the video will be posted on the project website for anyone who couldn't attend. They'll be able to go back and watch the video. So just a reminder that we're recording and you'll be able to share this video with others in your community who weren't able to be here tonight. Now, before we really jump into it, I'm going to go through a few technical details to make sure everyone's fully able to participate. As I mentioned, members of the public are in listen only mode, but CAG members, you have the option to turn your cameras on or off and to unmute using the buttons at the bottom of your screen. And you can also use the chat to chat with each other. It's kind of like the CAG members are at the front of the room in a traditional like in-person meeting around the conference table or that typical U-shaped table. And then our audience members are sort of in the back row there watching the meeting. Please check to make sure that your name shows up correctly and you can update it by using the more arrow or by clicking on your image and choosing rename. That way we can know who's here in the meeting today and will help our facilitator and myself. Remember to please keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. That helps cut down on the feedback and sort of background noise as we're going through the meeting. And you're welcome to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable doing so, especially during our discussion periods, or leave it off. It's really up to you and your comfort level. I know it's a long meeting and everyone's had a long day, so feel free to just do what you're comfortable with. And then for the chat, if you select hosts and panelists when you chat, that will go to all CAG members and all members of our team here, staff. If you select everyone, then it will also go to the audience, members of the public joining us, and they will see your chat message. So it's up to you. If you have thoughts or comments throughout the meeting, feel free to select the chat that you're most comfortable with or whoever you want to send your message to. If you have technical questions, you can chat directly to Miles, who's our tech support tonight, using the chat and use the drop-down menu and select Miles tech support, or you can call or text him. And Miles, if you could just throw your number, the best number to reach you on in the chat for everybody, that would be great. So if you run into difficulties throughout the meeting and you lose your sound or something happens, feel free to just reach out to Miles and he can make sure you get connected. During our discussion periods, we'll be using the chat a few times to kind of get your feedback, and we'll be using the raise your hand tools for your participation. So before we get going, why don't we just check it out, try this out, make sure you're with us and that your chat box is working. So please answer the question at the bottom of the screen, and you can send it to everyone or just to the hosts and panelists, which is our CAG members. It's up to you. And the question is, how old were you when you first rode on a Washington State ferry and where did you go? So I'll give everyone just a minute to share that, and then we can all sort of get to know each other and see who's in the room and make sure our chats are working. If you're not able to use your chat for any reason, then please just raise your hand and we'll make sure that we get that figured out. Okay. So while everyone's putting their answers in the chat, these are great. I'm going to turn it over to David Sowers, who's the Director of Terminal Engineering for Washington State Ferries, and he's going to kick us off and let us know what our agenda is for the evening. Dave.
All right. Well, thank you, Hadley. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today, especially in the evening. And I know everybody has a million other things going on. It's really important that you participate in this project, in this process, and I hope you get something out of this tonight. As you know, it's been a challenging year or so for Washington State Ferries. You're all aware of our crewing shortages and service reductions across the system. I do want you to know that we are still actively engaged in this project, and we're continuing to work hard and diligently on that. And we're going to talk about that today. But just wanted you to understand that we're listening to what you have to say tonight, and we want to continue to work together throughout this process. Tonight, I've asked Heather Marks from SDOT to join us. She's going to share some updates on the coordination efforts that have been going on between Washington State Ferries and SDOT. I've known Heather for a number of years. We worked closely on the Alaska Way Viaduct Replacement Program, and so I asked her to join us tonight and talk about some things. Also, part of the agenda, we want to review the purpose and need statement. This should reflect your comments and helps ready us for the next stages of this process, the Pell process. And I want to take a closer look at that process as well. And then at the end, we'll answer questions. And then we'll plan kind of what our next steps are. I do have one significant staffing change for us. I wanted to announce that Alec Williamson, who's kind of been our project director since we got going, recently retired in the last month. And so while I'm going to miss Alec and his leadership, and we worked together for a number of years on the viaduct program, and he really helped sort of set the stage for this project. We continue to have a highly capable team of ferry staff and consultant staff. And Hadley has some new additions she wants to talk about. So you're all in good hands, but I just wanted to let folks know that Alec has moved on and we wish him the best. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Heather. You can turn on your video there, Heather. And
oh, I hope my video's on. Is it not?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay. Hi, Dave.
Hey there.
I'm very happy to be here, and you guys should know that whenever Dave asks me to show up, I show up. I want to also tell you that I am your neighborhood, just up and over the hill on the bleeding edge of the Fauntleroy neighborhood. So I'm very pleased to be here with you. I am the director of the West Seattle Bridge Safety Program, and so I wanted to talk to you folks about some of the things that we're hearing about the Fauntleroy neighborhood in terms of traffic control, and let you know what we're working on. And so also here to answer any questions about the bridge or any other part of that program. Can you move to the next slide, please? So you know that the pandemic has reduced traffic volumes all through the system. And the West Seattle Bridge closure has had an impact on traffic patterns. So traffic isn't more right now, it's just moving in different ways. SDOT is working with SPD and ferries to ensure that everybody's having the best possible experience, both as travelers through the neighborhood and for the neighborhood itself. We really want to avoid hurting one group to make it better for another. And that is always the balance that we play in traffic engineering. Next slide, please. So one of the big things that we heard from the community, everybody, Vashon, Fauntleroy, wherever you're living, Burien, is that everybody wants us to repair the bridge as quickly as possible, full steam ahead. And I my team and I have been working pretty well nonstop since March 23rd to make that happen. The project is on schedule and on budget. Recently, we've completed 90% design. We are just this close to 100% design. The early work packages have been let and are beginning. Our main construction begins this month and will continue into June next year. The contractor is now advertising for additional subcontractors to help complete that work. This picture that you can see is a picture of some local elected officials and community task force members who are touring the inside of one of the box girders underneath the high-rise bridge. I don't know if Ann Higuera is here tonight, but she also will benefit from a tour coming up as a member of the community task force. Next slide, please. Another thing that we've heard is that there is speeding and increased neighborhood traffic through the Fauntleroy traffic. I want to encourage those of you who are ferry users, maybe who are coming from Vashon or from Burien, to remember that that Fauntleroy neighborhood is a place where people live and play and raise their kids. We know that ferry traffic has decreased from where it was before the pandemic and the bridge closure, but motorists, like I said, are using different routes, and so people might experience that traffic in a different way. We're going to restripe the ferry holding lane, not on the dock, though. We'll do that for you, Dave, if you want us to. But restripe, it'll only cost a little bit of money. We'll restripe the ferry holding lane there on Fauntleroy, and also install some no line cutting signs that reflect that RCW 4661-753. SDOT has also installed new and broken fixed radar feedback signs. I know it seems like nothing, but they actually work to slow down traffic. Next slide, please. The third big thing that we've heard from the neighborhood is that they're concerned about increased pedestrian safety, lighting, and sidewalks. So we're going to install paint and post curb bulbs. So a curb bulb is, where we bulb out the curb line to shorten the crossing distance. We're going to do that instead of with concrete. We're going to do that with paint and posts because it's fast. It reduces the crossing distance for people walking and increases pedestrian visibility. Also prevents that illegal parking that's a little too close to the crosswalks. So we'll be doing that in a couple of locations in the neighborhood, particularly the one that I've been waiting for years now is the one that's between the UCC Church and Fauntleroy Children's Center. So that's going to be an improvement that you should see as long as we have a little bit of a dry spell to put that paint down. We're also going to do some sidewalk beveling there near Endeline Joe's in that Wildwood and 45th intersection. We're also collecting additional speed and volume data to inform further improvements. It's really important that we make all of those improvements based on data that we see so that we're selecting the right intervention. Next slide, please. So we'll be installing all those treatments that I spoke of. We have to, for some of the traffic calming measures, we have to work with our SPD friend, or SFD, sorry, Seattle Fire Department friends. They like to make sure that we're not installing those traffic calming measures on their major response routes. It slows down fire trucks and it makes a really uncomfortable ride for those who are using Medic One. We are going to continue that data collection and collaboration with SPD. And as always, partner with our friends at WashDOT and the ferry terminal for driver education. So if there's time, Dave, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Yeah, Heather. So in the chat, Heather, we have a note from Frank who's telling us that the Fauntleroy holding lane was restriped today. And he says, thank you.
So good. Look how good I am, you guys.
Right.
Yes.
Just kidding. I had no idea. That's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad they got down there.
And then the first question that's in the chat, and then we'll take a few more, is could the Rose Street bus stop be restriped so it's more visible to ferry commuters?
Victoria, hi Victoria. You're on all the committees. Do you mean the curb? So we paint it red and yellow. Is that what you're referring to?
There we go. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, yes, that's exactly what I'm referring to, because especially in the dark in the winter, you can't
Okay.
even see that bus stop is there. And I did put in a find it, fix it request,
Uh-huh.
but I'd really like to speed that up if at all possible, because I just, I get off that bus and it's extremely dangerous. That ferry traffic starts moving when people are getting off the bus.
Yeah,
So,
it can be really threatening. I totally understand that.
Yeah.
I will text that in. I do want to alert you and everyone else that our crews move as fast as they can. It's
Yeah.
a big city and they have lots of requests, but I'll go see if I can boss somebody around and get you taken care of here
thank you, Heather.
quickly. You're welcome, Victoria. And if I fail, don't stop trying. Don't
I know
stop
where
trying.
you're at.
All right.
Okay, does anyone else have any more questions for Heather while we have her with us? And then we're gonna let her go. Okay, one more, Heather. It seems like outbound ferry users are coming mostly from the south. That seems to be leading to some crazy U-turns north of the terminal as people enter the holding lane. So I know we've talked about that.
Yeah, we sure have. So I assume what you mean, just make sure I understand that there are people who are coming to use the ferry that live south of the ferry dock. And they are traveling in, say, on Barton to get to the ferry dock. And you're wondering if there's anything that SDOT can do to mitigate that. So the first thing is, yes. And in fact, we have signage up that directs people to Morgan for that detour. And we actually, we made some more capacity at that location so that there's more room for cars to make it through the intersection. It's kind of a weird one right now because it's not, the amount of volume that intersection is seeing is unusual because of what I was talking about, how the traffic patterns are changing. There's not a lot that we can do to enforce a detour route. It really is just a suggestion. And I suspect that lots of people who are using the ferry, like they know where they're going. And so they don't need my stinking detour. But I'll see if there's anything additional that we can do there, John. Thank you for the question.
Okay, and then there's another one from Judy in the chat here. Any chance of getting the push button light at Roxbury and about 29th by the old Rox Hill School converted to a fully working light?
I asked this because we have a lot of traffic that gets somewhat metered by the light at 35th and Roxbury.
Yeah.
But it is often just a steady stream. And unless I wait 10 minutes just to turn left out of Safeway, I rely on the kindness of strangers to let me through because there's absolutely nothing that keeps that line from breaking between 35th and Safeway.
So you are talking about the half signal that goes from the Safeway across the street to the high-rise brick.
No, I'm talking about the light that is a pedestrian walk light option at the school. It's about a block west of the light to which you're referring.
Oh, right there at where Rox Hill School is?
Yes.
Across the street from, I think it's a gas station.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. There's a burrito truck there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Dave's like, oh my God.
Whatever you want is right there.
Yeah, I actually think that is a full signal. I think it is a four-way signal.
Yeah, but you have to push it. Someone has to push it, or a car has to sit on the side street until it changes. It's not a timed light.
Okay, I'll that would surprise me, but I'll check on it. I'll
Thank
check
you.
on that and see if there's something we can do.
Thank you.
I need to make a more thorough note of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can also remind you, Heather, with our notes from the meeting.
Hey, that is even better, Hadley.
Right.
That's the kind of service I expect here at the ferries.
Good.
All right,
Okay.
great.
Well, I'm going to move on now. Everybody has Heather's contact information. It's on the screen there. We can also pass along any messages. And I know Dave and Heather and myself, we're all talking a lot about these topics. So share comments of any one of us. We'll make sure that it gets fed in. It's not directly project related in terms of our long-term plans for the Fauntleroy terminal, but we thought it'd be helpful to have Heather come because some of what she's working on ties into our planning for Fauntleroy and certainly the impacts that some of you in the neighborhood are feeling and ferry riders traveling through West Seattle. So thank you, Heather, for joining us.
You're so welcome, Hadley. We just wanted to demonstrate to you that other, segments of government, we do actually talk like all the time. So we just wanted to demonstrate for you. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great meeting.
Okay, enjoy the rest of your evening, Heather.
Will do.
Okay, so moving on, as Dave mentioned, he gave a little staffing update. We have another staffing update that I'm very pleased to introduce, Lauren Foster. She has her camera on there and she has her name as facilitator. Lauren is our new consultant facilitator for this project. She's going to be supporting me in all of the community engagement along with her colleague, Laura Labissner Miller, who is also joining us tonight, listening in. And they're going to be doing a lot of the community engagement and communications work for this project. And Lauren's role is going to be facilitating this process and your work together. So I'm going to let Lauren introduce herself and say a few words.
Thanks, Hadley. Can everybody hear me okay? All right,
Best
great.
we can.
Thanks. Well, yeah, it's really an honor to be supporting this process for you. And I'm going to take a little bit of a backseat today as I get to know you and get up to speed on the process, but I'll be supporting this process moving forward. And I really enjoyed seeing everyone's responses to the opening question in the chat. And I really look forward to getting to know each of you. I've been supporting WSDOT planning processes like this, ferries planning processes like this for about 4 years. And I know it's really a gift for us to have your time and energy in this process. So first and foremost, thank you all for being here. Like I said, I'll pop in and out tonight, but Hadley will mostly be facilitating as I get up to speed. And I know you're eager to get into the meeting content, but I just wanted to briefly remind everyone about the role of this group so we can stay aligned as we head into all the work that's next in the coming months and years even. So I know you're done chartering, but I'm going to keep pulling this list up as a North Star. So most importantly, we are here to listen to you. So please continue to openly share your input and all of the great contextual information that you have about your communities. It's all connected. So even if you're not sure if something's relevant, just err on the side of sharing it. Raise the flag on issues that we should know about as we move along in the process and screen alternatives. You are our eyes on the ground. And speak up if you have any concerns with the CAG. If you have a concern with the process, please come to Hadley or me so that we can work through it. And we'll bring in whatever resources that we need to inform the process rather than dealing with issues elsewhere. So the other really important role that you play and that I will also help facilitate is you bringing information from these meetings back out to your communities. So we'll share all of this information in some format with the broader community, but you are really our ambassadors, you're our liaisons to make sure that your fellow community members know how to participate in this process. So before we move into the meat of the meeting, if we could go to the next slide before I hand it over to Hadley. I want to acknowledge that in our meeting materials that we sent out, there was an updated public comment log for you to review. And we're sharing this before every one of these meetings to make sure that these conversations are informed by the feedback that we're getting from the broader community and also to stay accountable to tracking and considering and responding to every comment that comes to us. So I'll just pause here and ask, make sure that everybody got the comment log, got a chance to look at it and see if there are any questions about it before we move on. Raise your hand or you could just unmute if you want to speak.
Lauren, this is Frank Immel. I would encourage, if there's any chance of getting it more than just a couple days ahead of the meeting, that would be highly appreciated.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you.
And Haley, my colleague, just dropped the public comment log into the chat for anybody who hasn't had a chance to look at it yet. Thanks, Frank.
This is Scott Harvey. In other words, I appreciate the comments. The one thing that was that I represent the Vashon group, but I recognize that the important part about what we're doing is that we have 3 groups, and at the end of the process that all 3 groups should benefit. And I'm a little bit concerned because certain suggestions provide no benefit to either Vashon or Southwest riders. And so I'm hoping that as we go forward that that everybody can focus on the fact that all groups should benefit at the end of the day. And I think that's what Ferries wants to see as well. And so I hope that we, even though hey, there's a lot of things that I think would make things better, but would only really help Vashon. And I recognize that that's probably not going to happen. But again, I would hope the other groups would also recognize the fact that there's a perfect thing that Southwest wants and a perfect thing that Fauntleroy wants. Those probably aren't going to happen either. So I think it's really important that we all work together to find out how we can get to win-win-win.
Thanks for saying that, Scott. That's a really important goal of this group. And it's also part of why I want to get to know each of you so that I can hear your thoughts and concerns specifically, and then bring them all into conversation with each other and balance all of the perspectives. One of the things that I think is so valuable about this sort of process is having the different opinions and perspectives and ideas in the room together so that we can help inform a decision that works best for all of the users. Hadley, do you want to say anything else about that?
Oh, I really appreciate your comments, Scott, as well. And I think they'll be helpful for Lauren to hear as she gets to know all of you and takes on her new role. So thank you, Lauren, and thank you all for sharing those comments. If you have other thoughts for Lauren, you can send her a chat message or send her a message through the project email that you all have. She has access to that and she monitors that regularly along with the rest of our team. So feel free to send any follow-up thoughts you have on that or the comment log. And Frank, thanks for your comment. We will try to get that out earlier, and perhaps even in between meetings, we could share updates to that because we keep it updated in real time. So it's available to share. So now we're really ready to move into the work of the meeting. And last time we met at the end of July, we shared with you a rough draft, early draft of the project's preliminary purpose and need statement. And we received a lot of feedback from this group and from our executive and technical advisory groups, as well as a few members of the public. And all of those comments are in that comment log that Lauren was just talking about. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those, you can see all the feedback we heard. There's also feedback that's contained in the meeting notes from your meeting that we had, and the meeting with the executive advisory group and the technical advisory group. We had just good, robust discussions about that draft. So the team has spent the last couple months working through all of those comments and also doing some more work to really flesh out the purpose and need statement and add some more data. So I'm really excited for you to see it and to hear your thoughts. You all received it by email a few days ago, and I hope you've had a chance to read it. But I want to reiterate that this is the first step in the Pell process, in our planning process. We're still really, really early in the process, although we're making good progress. So this is an important first step, and one of our main goals of today's meeting is to make sure that everyone is comfortable with this purpose and need statement, and that we're all kind of familiar with what it says as our foundation for the project and moving forward. So as we're waiting for Marcia to join us, and she's going to really walk through the purpose and need statement and what's changed, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. We'll take 2 to 3 minutes here for everyone to locate that attachment in your email and have a chance to read through it if you haven't already, and prepare your thoughts. And then Marcia is going to walk through. And I see that Laura just shared the file in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can see it in the chat. And she sent it to everyone. So I know members of the audience here, members of the public joining us, you may not have had a chance to read it. So feel free to take a look. I see everyone locating it, reading it. And then Marcia, whenever you're ready, if you want to turn on your camera, and then you can
Hadley.
start. Yes.
Oh, sure, Hadley. Thanks. So I hope everyone got a chance to pull it out and take notes, and we received your comments on it. But I know that the purpose and needs statement, that many of you know what it is, but I'll just take a little bit of a step back just to make sure that if there's anyone who's new to the process, that they have a good understanding before we jump into the comments. So if you look at page 1, the call out box that has a green line around it, that gives you a definition of the purpose and need statement in response to your comments. So we added that as an explanation. So the purpose and need statement explains why the project should be implemented. The purpose really represents the problem we are trying to solve. It's not a solution to the problem or solutions. The need section provides data to support why we need to address the problem. It's based upon planning factors that are developed through a planning process. And the needs section, as you'll see, is really forward-thinking, as it's forward-looking, as it uses existing conditions to set the stage, and it's not a retrospective account of what past impacts to the environment and the community. It's really taking a step from here on. The purpose and need represents the starting point. It's really an anchor, if you will, for developing a full range of alternatives, including a no-build option. This means it can evolve as new information becomes available. I really want to thank those who did provide feedback on the preliminary purpose and need statement. We heard a really wide range and variety of ideas from all 3 advisory groups. In response to what we heard, we made several changes to the purpose and need to focus on describing the core need for the project and remove language that identifies specific solutions. I'd like to highlight a few key changes we made based on the feedback we heard, starting with the purpose on page 1. Here we emphasize the core need to preserve and upgrade the terminal upfront in this statement. The first 2 bullets are largely the same as what was in the preliminary purpose and need statement. And then the more significant changes are to the final 3 bullets. The 3rd bullet is refined to focus on operational efficiencies that support reliable service without mentioning any specific metrics like on-time performance. And then we honed in on the core need to provide efficient and safe loading and fare processing for pedestrians, vehicles, and bicycles without pointing to a specific solution. Then we focused on improving multimodal connectivity and investing in technology to enhance customer experience and accommodate ridership growth projected in the WSF long-range plan. And again, this is to reduce any bias towards specific solutions. Then heading to page 2, you'll see in the needs section that we added a considerable amount of data based on your feedback. For example, we referenced WSF's sea level rise study and added comparisons to other docks in the system and the triangle route. If you head back to the final section of the purpose and needs statement, which is called the goals section, that supplements the purpose and needs statement overall, and it's a really important piece of the document. We revised the goals again based on your feedback, and you can see by this comparison chart what was in the preliminary goals and what the revised goals look like. So we focused on improving our customers' experience without referencing specific performance metrics, and then moved some of the previous goal statements to the purpose statement, which is including a multimodal connectivity to help accommodate growth. Then we refined the third goal to highlight our commitment to balancing the concerns and values of all three communities that are served, according to the statement we got earlier from a member. And then we updated the environmental goal to be more specific, so it references the rich cultural and natural resources in the area. And then finally added a goal to highlight our commitment to partnering with local agencies. So there's just a brief overview of the purpose and needs statement, and I'll turn it back to you, Hadley.
Yes, and we can't really see you, Marcia. I don't know if you're having camera troubles, but if you want to stay on with us, we'll take questions from the group right now.
Oh, sorry about
that. It's okay. We can hear you fine.
Yeah.
So this is now the time to open it up for discussion from the CAG about this revised purpose and need. And we really would like to sort of check in with you on if the revised document addresses the comments you brought up and comments that you can see in the comment log we heard from the community. And if you have any remaining questions or comments, and I see there's a couple in the chat here. One, Fletcher is pointing out a typo. Thank you so much for that, Fletcher. We'll make sure to get that corrected. And then Victoria, you referenced the table that was on this 2 slides ago. Laura, if you could go back to that slide about the need. There's a table here that we had shared another version of at the last meeting, and Victoria rightly pointed out that some of the headers on our table were incorrect, that it said walk-ons and bikes last time, and this actually is referencing walk-on passengers or passengers in vehicles. So basically anybody who pays the passenger fare, that's how those numbers are tallied. So this, to answer your question, Victoria, yes, this table was updated after our last meeting. And it does align with the numbers that are in our 2040 long range plan. Okay, so you can go back to the other slide, Laura, and then I see a few hands up. Judy.
I think you folks could incorporate a little bit of credit to your advantage in terms of the environmental implications. What I'm suggesting is an additional clause in the last sentence under structural reliability, the second paragraph. Actually, it's the end of that section that speaks to the removal of asbestos in the pilings and also the toxic runoff from the trestle. My suggestion is, in addition, the terminal does not meet current seismic or structural design standards, nor does it meet current standards for preventing toxic runoff from entering state waters. That's a little more specific on the environmental implications of what's there now and what could be replacing it.
Thanks for that, Judy. Marcia, do you have any comments on that, or is that something you think we could incorporate?
Well, that one section is the title is structural reliability, not environmental reliability. But we can consider where that statement might go.
I couldn't find any other relevant place, so it's up to you.
Yeah, I do want you to know that it's not forgotten or not overlooked or ignored, that we have a host of federal, local, state laws and regulations that come into play as we move further into the environmental review stage, because it's always the understanding that what exists there today and what we're starting from today is not always up to current standards environmentally, and so it's clearly understood that it's part of what needs to be fixed.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So in the next, I'll just go to the next chat comment here. Michelle is saying that she thinks it's very positive to highlight coordination between agencies. Thanks for that, Michelle. And that was a comment we heard from several people, including some of our agency partners who were on the technical advisory group, that they thought it was important to have that in the statement itself. And so the next question, Frank, you have your hand up. You have a comment or question?
Thank you. I will second the thought on the coordination between the agencies, and actually that ties into, I have 2 points. Is the TAG in the executive committee, are they providing input into this purpose and need statement as well?
Yes, they are. The executive advisory group is going to meet tomorrow afternoon, and then the technical advisory group is going to meet on Tuesday, and their meetings will have a very similar agenda to the one we're having with you tonight, and they'll be reviewing this revised version and providing comments on it.
Okay. And then one other point, the table that you provided that shows ridership talks about 2017 numbers. And then obviously we've all can agree, and was brought up earlier with COVID and or, the bridge thing will go away, but the challenge there, I think that the impact there will be people will become accustomed to doing things a certain way, especially after a couple of years of doing it. And so may not necessarily want to go back to what they've done before. And that, tied with COVID, is there any plan on reevaluating or relooking at ridership numbers to look at potential 2040 implications? Because I could very easily see this having a fairly significant change in those rider numbers that may be anticipated.
Yeah, Marcia, do you know the status of that, or Dave? You're still with us? I think Frank is talking about sort of reevaluating the numbers in the 2040 long range plan based on when our ridership stabilizes after COVID.
I do know that they have started looking at an update to those numbers. I don't have a timeline of when those would be available, but as part of our process, we would be looking more specifically at what's occurring at the Fauntleroy terminal during that environmental review stage. But we may be using the 2040 long range plan planning numbers at the start. And then as you get to that point where they have more updated information on the revisions that the 2040 long range plan is undertaking, we could use that data.
Thanks, Marcia. Now, Frank, as you know, when we talked about this during the long range plan process, that's meant to be more of a living document, and that ferries will be kind of evaluating it and assessing progress on achieving some of those recommendations and the information included in it.
Okay, thank you.
So Scott has a comment in the chat. He says, great updated version and the goals make perfect sense. Thanks for that, Scott. And Marty, you have your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry to be late. First, kudos to all the hard work of all the ferry employees and this new purpose and need. I have a comment. I think there is a mischaracterization of the triangle route on-time performance. The triangle route operates above system-wide average, above any other multi-directional route, and now and in the past. This route was the only route to improve its on-time performance in 2019, pre-pandemic, thanks to the WSF implementing its new schedules. 18 to 20 hours a day under normal functioning 3-boat, 3-destination schedule, this route does not routinely overflow the current dock's 80-car holding dock. During the 4 to 5 hours of peak travel, rush hours, the dock overflows. According to the 2018 track study, if all the factors that contribute to the rush hours decreased efficiency were solved by whatever means, a maximum of 126 more vehicles would be transported during those 4 hours. 80% of those cars, so 100, would be single occupancy vehicles, a percentage that has not decreased 1 iota in decades. So in summary, this dock operates above average system-wide and near the aspirational 95% on-time performance, expanding to serve more than 100 single occupancy vehicles during rush hour needs to be justified against fiscal, environmental costs to the community. And I think the statement there makes it sound like, in this purpose and need, makes it sound like the dock isn't as good as that.
Thanks for that, Marty. Dave or Marcia, do you have any response or thoughts on that?
Well, I can't speak to the on-time performance. I know things have changed recently, and I was hoping, Hadley, you had a better answer for that. I mean, I think you make some good points. Operationally, there's still issues that we have at the terminal because of the inability to hold 124 cars while we're processing as we're loading. That's the feedback I'm getting from my counterparts in the operations group, and it's something that we would like to see addressed. I think it benefits the community, but part of this conversation is really to collect everybody's thoughts, and Scott said it, we're all going to have to bend a little bit. I'll state the obvious. We have a finite amount of budget. We cannot do anything and everything. So, there are constraints. We want to be respectful of how we, impact, but we also want to make sure that we, within those constraints, can operate as effectively as possible. And so certainly the Triangle Task Force did a lot to improve reliability and did a lot to help the folks trying to get to Vashon and Southworth. We still have, and I'll add to a little bit to what Frank asked earlier, is I don't just have a 24 view of this terminal. We're building a replacement trestle that will last for 75 years. So it's not just, we've had a dip in the ridership and people are doing things differently. We also have to think, as we look to the future, what will the facility look like in 50 years? So we are trying to take that long view of it, but you make some, Marty, you make some great points, and I don't have that reliability on-time performance in front of me, so I can't answer that. But I don't know, Marcia, do you have anything else you want to add?
Just that I hope, Marty, that you provide your comments too. It sounds like you've prepared them ahead of time to share tonight, and it would be good to that you would send those to us so we can include it in our comment log and more thoroughly consider what you've provided.
Yep, I agree with that. And I know you've made similar comments, Marty, so I've just noted that down. It's definitely something we should consider before calling this document final. Does anyone else have any questions or comments in the group? I see that Victoria would like to see the number of walk-ons be counted separately than vehicle passengers, as a discussion of possible pedestrian ramp speaks to this need. And Marcia, that sounds to me like something we could consider as part of our screening criteria.
Yes, we could.
Folks who walk on, which is the
Yes.
next step in our process here, our Pell process. So thanks for that, Victoria. We should definitely keep that in mind. And then Susan is saying she seconds Scott's comment that this updated purpose and need reads much clearer to me. And I think the goals are specific and easy to understand. Thank you so much for that, Susan. That's really great. Is anyone else who I haven't heard from? I'll come back to you in a minute, Frank, but I just want to check in with some of our other CAG members who we haven't heard from. Anyone have any other thoughts or questions or concerns about this document as we try to sort of wrap up our conversation about it. Especially anyone joining us. We've heard a few comments from Susan and Scott and others from Vashon. Anyone else? Okay, Frank, do you have another question or comment?
I do. I just was curious about the process. It's that you're asking, it sounds like what you're asking us for is comments to then provide, to then transfer this or change this over to the purpose and need statement and not a draft. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's a great,
know what's going on here.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And we're gonna get to that in a moment. So the goal tonight is to sort of check in with everyone and see if we're all comfortable calling this, as you put it, the purpose and need statement for Pell, the Pell purpose and need statement. And in a few moments, we're going to transition to Maggie from our team is going to give a little bit more context into how the purpose and need fits into the Pell process and what's coming next. Anne or Emily, do you have any thoughts to share tonight? Not to put you on the spot, but we haven't heard from either one of you.
Yeah, this is Emily. I'll just jump in to say that I think it looks great and I appreciate all the effort that's gone into it. It's a complex issue and I feel like that document summarizes up the constraints pretty well.
Great, thanks, Emily.
And I'll jump in as well. The comment about single occupancy vehicles made me start thinking about the van pools. And this is totally anecdotal because and I have no data to back it up, but I can say I don't think I've seen a van pool in months on the dock going to Vashon. I know that there's a specific mention of transit. I don't know if there needs to be a specific mention of van pool or if van pools are just considered transit, but encouraging that as a way to get people out of single occupancy vehicles.
Great, thanks for that, Anne. That's a good comment, and that's certainly something we could add. And one of the big changes we made to the document is putting more comments in about transit coordination and other demand management approaches, because we did hear several comments from you, all of you, about the focus on single occupancy vehicles and wanting to make sure that that was really part of the need.
Hadley, I can't figure out how to do the raising my hand in the Zoom.
Oh, hi, Susan. Yeah, go ahead.
The question, just something that came to mind. I didn't get to that. The comment log was so long that I had to skim it. But it seemed like there were so many comments in there about like, add another dock at Southworth, and can you do the King County water taxi, and can we buy this gas station up here, and just like all these like really big picture ideas. And I think John's comment here just in the chat sort of kind of goes along with this, is this document, although it doesn't spell it out directly, it kind of reads to me like we're just talking about replacing this thing where it is. Though it doesn't say that, and it doesn't, like, I don't know. I just wasn't sure, like, are we still open to all those crazy ideas, or are we just like, this is what's happening and quit talking about all that other stuff? So I don't know. That's just something that came to my mind.
No, that is a great question, because we've heard that in a lot of comments. So Marcia, do you want to, I know we're going to get into that more later in the meeting, but do you want to answer Susan's question?
Sure, Susan. So the purpose and need statement, you got to think about the essentials of really what's the issue out there, and then how we're going to, then the data supporting that. It's not really giving you the solutions, but when we got comments, we kind of had to sort them, and we got a lot of the comments, like you mentioned, that gave solutions already. And so we didn't want to lose track of those and kept those in a list so that we could begin to keep those and consider them when we're at that stage in the process, which is coming up next when we begin to look at screening criteria and then alternatives. So that having this base document be clear on what the problem is makes it more flexible when we're trying to look at how to solve it we're not giving you a predetermined idea. So by the list of things that you see there, the five purpose and the five needs help us create ways, parameters, if you will, for looking at solutions. And that's what the next step is. It allows us to consider a wider range than really just honing in on replacing the dock only, which is what you said is kind of underlying an undertone there. That's one of the, so it's just, we're just using this as our pattern, knowing that there could be adjustments later on, but it's what we're starting with as our foundation of looking ahead.
Thanks. And Susan, we're going to, in a few moments after we take a break, we'll get into more detail on what comes next in the process and how the purpose and need fits into the development of alternatives and screening criteria. But I just want to go back to something you said, that it sounded like the purpose and need statement as written makes it sound like we're only considering alternatives at the dock at the current location. So if there's any specific language in there that stands out to you, we really tried hard to, in this revision, make the language more general and try not to hone in on certain solutions or certain, make assumptions about where the terminal would be or what it would look like. So that's the kind of feedback we'd love to hear, either now if you have it in mind, or you can follow up with us, because if something is making it sound to you like it's only in the current location or only in the way that the dock looks today, then that would be really helpful, because that's not the intention. So before we move on, we're going to take sort of a check with everyone in a few minutes, but I just want to, anyone we haven't heard from yet, I want to acknowledge that John has a comment in the chat here that's really helpful, and it's along the same lines as Susan's, that he's wondering if it would be important in the purpose and need statement to identify what is out of scope. And Marcia, do you have any comments on that, or whether that would be appropriate?
No, yeah, I think we don't want to, again, we don't want to provide solutions. We want to just really state what the issue is, because as we move along through the process, there are a number of things that will guide us and will let us know how an alternative or solution may fit. And that has to do with when we dig into all of the discipline areas of the environment, the built and natural, finding out what regulations there are, what laws and other approvals there are for each of those, will help to give us those parameters of what's out of scope. And as Dave reminded us, we do have a certain budget, and we can't ask for the moon, but we can live within that budget to find a solution that works as a win-win-win, as Scott mentioned too. So it's not the place where we say what's out of scope, but is rather part of our workbook, our notes on the side, that we might keep a list of things that as we move along, kind of information on what those other parameters are.
Okay, thanks, Marcia. So before we move on, is there anyone that I haven't heard from yet that has comments here? Anyone else want to share thoughts on the purpose and need? Anna or Richard, any of you from Kitsap County, Southworth community, have any thoughts to share?
Hey, this is Anna from Southworth.
Hey, Anna.
Hi. Yeah, I have just something to add. First off, I think this is a much more thorough version, so I really appreciate that. During our last meeting, I brought up a concern about, we're basing the purpose and needs on the 2040 LRP. And because this is a project that probably isn't going to open for, I don't know how many years. And then it's also planned to last for 75 years. So I don't feel like the 2040 long range plan really addresses the 75-year need for the ferry terminal. So I was just wondering if, I know that the 2040 long range plan is the only data that we have available right now, but I was just wondering, as a need for the ferry dock, over the course of the 75-year lifespan, if there's anything else we can do to take that into consideration as a need.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Dave, do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess I'm struggling here trying to understand exactly what the question is. Is it that the long range plan and the design life of the facility aren't necessarily in alignment and what we're going to use to project growth 75 years from now? Is that what you're asking?
Just how do you project the need for the projected growth over the 75-year life, instead of just looking at it over the next 20 years?
Well, I think so. Just to add some context to this, Ferries doesn't come up with these projections all on our own. We use data that's provided to us by the Puget Sound Regional Council, PSRC, and I think they have a 2050 plan right now on their website. They are the ones that give us, based on census data and projections of employment, they give us information on how the peninsula will grow, how these communities will grow, what the trends are in transportation, employment, and all those types of things. So then we take that into play as we develop our own long-range plan document. I hope it wasn't taken the wrong way, but my 75-year comment was that we're coming up with a project that we need to replace the existing facility. It's been out there for, let's just say, 75 years, and it's long past its design life. So whatever we put in at Fauntleroy or wherever to serve the community it's going to be engineered for that kind of a design life, so it'll be there. Now, what we don't have projections of what the ridership will be 75 years from now. We don't have the ability. I don't think PSRC has the ability to forecast that. Certainly, we all know that things will look a lot different in 75 years. Go back 75 years from today, and things look a lot different. So, heck, just 2 years ago, things look a lot different. So there's lots of things that are in play and changing, and we're going to just do the best we can with the information that we have. We're always going to take this sort of 20-year outlook because we think that's a reasonable approach. But I just was trying to make a comment that from an engineering standpoint, these facilities like the tunnel, like the West Seattle Bridge that Heather's designing, they're all going to be around long after we're gone, and they'll still be serving the community. And engineers, in the future will be planning how those projects either augment those facilities, change those facilities, add to those facilities, or maybe people are getting to work a whole other way. So
thanks Dave. And Anna, thanks so much for that comment. I think that's a good reminder that we need to be mindful of the lifespan of the facility, even beyond the numbers that we have in front of us in the long range plan. And then Washington State Ferries does update the long range plan periodically. It was done once a decade up until 2019. And I know that our planning team really intends to do that more frequently and kind of treat that more like a living document. So I think as this planning process continues, hopefully there'll be more thought in the long range plan process that can sort of feed into this project and help inform planning for this project. So I'm going to move on in a few minutes, but I just want to double check again if anyone else has comments. Devin or David, anyone we haven't heard from that's on that you want to come on and make a comment or put something in the chat. And in the chat, Scott shared a really helpful anecdote here as someone who commuted off Vashon for 25 years. He's saying the single occupancy vehicle traffic may not change much because driving is expensive. So everyone who could take Metro and the water taxi or van pool is likely already doing it. So that's just a helpful thought from an Islander who's seen it as a commuter. And then Susan, thank you so much for your comment and that suggested edit. I think that's something we can definitely consider as we make these final revisions and revise the document. Susan's suggesting that there's some language in some of the first sentences on page 1 that maybe make it seem like we're only considering keeping the dock in its existing location. Thanks for that comment. Devin is saying that thinks the updated version looks good. Thank you so much, Devin. So as we wrap this up, just as a way to sort of check in with everyone, make sure that all your thoughts are taken into consideration here. We're going to do a little feedback to Lauren, our facilitator. If you are comfortable with the purpose and need statement as it is, with some of the suggestions we've heard today, such as adding somewhere noting the runoff, as Judy suggested, Marty's comment about making sure we're accurately depicting the on-time performance and correcting the typo that Fletcher pointed out to us. Thank you, Fletcher. And maybe adding a mention of van pools, as well as some of the suggestions that Susan made in the chat. So with those edits and our other comments, if you'll give some thought to whether you are comfortable with this revised purpose and need, and therefore moving on to the next step in the Pell process. And if you were going to send your response in the chat directly to Lauren Foster, our facilitator, and this will keep your response anonymous to the rest of the group. So this is sort of a poll where we want to hear your thoughts, and the choices are: yes, I'm comfortable with moving on to the next step. No, I would like more chance after this meeting to submit more comments or have more of an offline conversation with Washington State Ferries. Or maybe, meaning you're still kind of processing all this information, or you need more information, or you have some questions and you're not quite ready to call this final. And thank you, Richard. I see your comment in the chat here. Richard's saying he wants to piggyback on what Anna said about the long-term question with Kitsap County's aggressive growth. And so many people moving to Kitsap County from King County, and making sure that that's taken into consideration. That's a great comment. So I see our CAG members are responding in the chat. So just give some thought to where you're at, and this will just give us a little check-in. I'm going to let you think about that as we take a quick break, and Lauren's going to help me look at all our responses and kind of see where we're at, and we'll come back with more information on the Pell process. So 5 minutes, which puts us at about 13 minutes past 7. You turn off your cameras, go get a stretch break, get some water, and we'll meet back here in a few minutes to move on with the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, everyone, just another minute here and we're going to resume the meeting. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. As those of you rejoin us from your break, it looks like from the chat, and Lauren, you can let me know what you saw. I know some folks chatted directly to you and some put their responses in the main chat, but from what I'm seeing, it looks like the majority of the group is said yes, and they're ready to move on. And then a couple of you said maybe, so you're still thinking or processing or maybe need more information, and we can follow up with you after the meeting to see if the information we're going to cover next helps answer your questions, or if we need to have a little more conversation. So I'll follow up with those of you who said maybe, but it looks like everyone else is saying yes. Maybe a couple more questions lingering out there that we can talk about. But with that, I'm going to move us on to the next part of our agenda, which is the conversation about the planning and environmental linkages study process. This is a federal process that's designed to build in more community input early in the environmental process. But before we begin, we wanted to get a sense of your familiarity with other federal environmental processes, such as an EIS or an environmental review process. Those of you who may be familiar with other major projects in the Seattle area and their environmental process. So for fun, Lauren's going to run a quick poll here, and everyone is welcome to participate in this poll, even our audience members. So the question is, how familiar are you with the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, environmental review process, such as an environmental impact statement? So you can go ahead and respond to the poll, and then we'll share the results.
Hadley, not sure if it's just me, but it's not accepting my choice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, me as well. I can't.
Me too.
And panelists cannot vote.
It doesn't work.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? Then we'll have to skip that for today. That would have been fun, and we'll try to figure something else out.
We could respond by just typing in our chat, couldn't we?
That's a great idea.
Sure. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that? And we're going to move on. This was meant to just sort of get a check to see who's familiar with this type of process. But as you're putting your answers in the chat, I'm going to introduce Maggie Buckley, who is a part of the environmental team for this project. And she's one of the folks who's been writing our purpose and need statement. And she is working with Marcia on the whole Pell study process. So Maggie, welcome. And I'm going to let you turn it over to you. Maggie, are you able to join us? Oh, there you are. Can't hear you. I see you're talking, but we don't have any audio at the moment.
Hadley?
Yes, now I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Test now?
Yes, I can hear you, Maggie.
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, well, that's interesting because I can't hear you, but as long as you can hear me, we can move forward?
Yes, I can hear you. I will
With
nod my
head nods
head.
and everything else?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, folks. Thank you for your patience. And as Hadley and Marcia both mentioned, we've got a lot of questions and comments on the purpose and need. And we've also had a lot of questions regarding the overall Pell process. So we wanted to take the opportunity tonight to share a little bit more about the process with you so that you have a better sense of what to expect and how you each can influence the process moving forward. So, assuming you all can hear me, Planning and Environmental Linkages, PEL, is really a more forward-thinking or collaborative way of approaching transportation decision-making. And it's different from the traditional planning process because it allows us to consider environmental, community, and economic factors earlier in the decision-making process, which is key. And then the idea is that we can take what we learn from PEL to inform the environmental review process that all transportation projects must eventually undergo. And I think it's important to also note before we move on that although Washington State Ferries is the project sponsor in this case, PEL is a federal process and it requires a federal agency sponsor, who in this case is the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA. So in some of the material that we're going to show you tonight and moving forward, you'll see that there are various concurrence points for FHWA as the federal sponsor for this process. Okay, so why are we using PEL in this case? Well, there are lots of documented benefits of PEL. And we wanted to highlight a few of those tonight, and you'll see those listed in this slide. And the first is really more meaningful engagement with the people that we're trying to serve by this project. The PEL process really allows us to share information and request input from the community in between the long-range planning process and the environmental process. The second benefit is building relationships with both the community and our agency partners. And the hope is really that those relationships won't just extend through PEL, but they're carry into our future phases of project delivery, such as design, environmental, and construction. And the third and fourth benefits that you'll see, the bullets on the slide here, are really about efficiency in project delivery. So PEL gives us the opportunity to document existing conditions, consider potential environmental impacts, which we've heard is very important to many of you, identify mitigation strategies earlier in the project lifecycle. So again, the idea is that should lead to solutions that better reflect environmental needs and community needs before we even get to the formal environmental review process. And as captured in the last two bullets there, if we can go back, sorry, we think that all this collaboration will really lead to more informed decision making. And the idea is that better decisions will be more reflective of the needs of all three communities in the Triangle Route. And Frank, I wanted to address your question specifically. Our goal right now in the process is to develop a really strong purpose and need within PEL, which ideally will set us up for a successful NEPA project, which would be the next phase of the project. But if we discover that some of our data is stale and we need to update projections and we have better or new planning data, then we will have an opportunity to update the purpose and need statement before moving into environmental review. There will be a decision point there for the NEPA lead agency. So I just wanted to make sure you all were aware of that. Okay, so where does PEL fit into the overall project lifecycle? So most of you are probably familiar with the more traditional process that transportation projects go through. And that traditional process is shown in the green boxes there on the slide. So we start with a long range planning process. And the intent there is to identify more overarching needs and priorities within a larger transportation system. And in there, you move to box 2, which is where we better define the purpose and need in an environmental review process. We identify potential alternatives, document potential impacts of those alternatives, and how they may affect our community. From there, we identify a preferred alternative that moves into the design phase, acquire any needed property, and then we move on to construction of the project. And then finally, as shown in the final box there, we maintain and operate the infrastructure once it's built. So as the name really implies, the planning and environmental linkages process is that step in between the long-range planning process and the environmental review process. So it gives us an opportunity to engage the community and our project partners before we go into environmental review or the NEPA process. And hopefully, again, that will set us up for better success in NEPA once we get there. So with that, Hadley, I think I will hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Maggie. I hope you can hear this discussion, and maybe we'll have some questions coming your way in a minute. So as the graphic on the screen shows, Maggie went through where Pell fits in the overall project development process. And then within Pell, which is where we are right now, it's about a 2-year process, as we've talked about. We're right at the beginning, the first box that says we are here. We're developing the purpose and need. We're going to begin developing screening criteria as our next step and developing that list of alternatives that should be considered and screened against the purpose and need. So you can see we're at that first box, and then we'll move into level 1 screening, which is really a fatal flaw analysis, determining from there, after we go through level 1 screening, which alternatives to carry forward into level 2 screening, refining our screening criteria, evaluating that refined list of alternatives, and identifying significant environmental constraints. And then all of that will wrap up with a Pell study report. That's really the outcome of this phase that we're in right now, is a report likely around in early 2023 that summarizes the results of the level 1 to 2 screening. And that report is where we would recommend an alternative or maybe several alternatives that would then advance into the environmental review that Maggie just talked about, that more traditional environmental review process, such as an EIS or other NEPA environmental review. So that kind of gives you a sense of where we're at right now in November 2021. We've got a process ahead of us that will narrow down the range of alternatives by doing 2 levels of screening. And then we move into the NEPA SEPA environmental review phase. So we wanted to give that kind of that roadmap to you to see where we're headed and where we are at right now. And Laura, if you can move to the next slide. This gives you a sense of taking those same steps in the process and overlaying where community engagement fits in, really your role in particular. We worked together last spring when we kicked this project off, and you all applied to be on the CAG by developing our community engagement plan, establishing our advisory groups. We're now in that box 2 that I just talked about, developing the purpose and need and the screening criteria and the alternatives. That's the work we'll be doing at our next meeting and sort of for the rest of this year in 2021. And then we'll move into level 1 screening, and you'll have an opportunity to review the results of the level 1 screening and comment on them, and look at the alternatives and weigh in on the alternatives that we should carry forward into level 2. And then we'll be providing information about existing conditions and more of the studies that the project team's been doing and the refined level 2 screening criteria, and sharing with you after level 2, those results of the level 2 screening, getting your input on those as we work together to refine the list of alternatives and determine next steps. And then you'll have a chance to review the draft Pell study report. So that's something to sort of summarize the whole process, and we'll get your comments on that. And you'll have a chance to comment on what alternatives should be carried forward into the next phase. And then we'll begin transitioning to the environmental review phase, and we'll be working with you to determine the role of the CAG in that next phase. As you'll remember, you all kind of signed on to be part of this Pell process, and we'll be discussing at the end of this process what the next phase looks like, and if we feel like it'd be helpful to have an advisory group that advises us through the environmental review phase. So that's sort of a broad overview of the next 1.5 to 2 years worth of work and where we're at now. And I'm hoping that that sort of starts to answer some of the questions about when we begin discussing alternatives and when we begin discussing what's outside the scope or what alternatives would be discarded or not carried forward. And our next slide gives you a little more of a sense of kind of how the process is going to work. This is a graphic you saw at one of our last meetings, that reminder that this is an iterative community engagement process. So we're not going to necessarily move through those steps linearly, but we will be returning to things, making sure everyone's comfortable with each step of the way, just like we did with the purpose and need, where you'll see something, you'll have a chance to comment on it, we'll revisit it, make sure everyone's comfortable, and then we'll move on. And then this next graphic is something that Lauren helped me with, and we're going to kind of use this as we move through the process to show where we're at in our work together as a group. And this is a roadmap of where the group is going over the next 2 years. And while it doesn't really correspond directly to each box means each, one meeting, it does sort of show the topics that we'll be bringing to you in the order that we'll be discussing them. So we're here on our second box, although we've had 3 meetings. We had some meetings where we chartered the group and got going on our work together. And then we've been discussing the purpose and need and reviewing revisions to the purpose and need. And then we'll be moving forward down here at this 4th box at the bottom to define screening criteria. And then moving into developing that list of alternatives, starting with the list that we've already heard, a lot of the alternatives that have been suggested in the course of our work together over the last year and years, as people have suggested ideas for the Fauntleroy terminal and the route. So I'm just not going to go into too much detail on this graphic, but it's something that we'll return to at our future meetings as we sort of track our progress together. So with that, it's another chance to ask questions and see if that helps address some of the questions that came up as we reviewed the purpose and need, and if you all have a better sense of where we're at and what the work together that we're going to do entails. Any questions about all of that, either for Maggie or for myself or Marcia? No questions. Okay, anyone have any questions, not necessarily about what I just covered or what Maggie covered, but any other topics that you'd like to bring up tonight, or maybe circling back to those of you who put maybe about your feelings about the purpose and need? Does any of this help kind of clarify the context of the purpose and need and make you feel differently about sort of where we're headed and what our next step is? Frank.
I would say for my maybe that I put in there, it's just more or less, you said there's a couple of revisions to some wording and some additions. I would just like to see that. I think other than that, I think it's solid, but it's just, I'd like to see the wording and not just, approve something I haven't seen.
Great. Thanks, Frank. That's good. Yeah, we will certainly send back out to the group the revised purpose and needs so that you all have it. And then that'll be something that we'll share at the next meeting too, the final version. I just wanted to sort of check in as sort of setting the stage for our next meeting. When I say screening criteria, does everybody have a good sense of what I mean there? Or anybody have questions about that?
Yeah, I do. I personally, I'd like to really, I'm hoping we have a little bit more information on that. What is that? I'm hoping we can get kind of the definition of what it is you're looking for from us as how to define that prior to the end of this meeting. So we have between now and the next meeting to kind of come up with those. If
Yeah,
you're
that'd be
input from us, and maybe you're not asking input from us. I don't know what those are.
Well, we're not yet, because that'll be the topic of the next meeting, and we will be providing some things for you to react to ahead of and at the next meeting. But just in terms of what screening criteria is, Maggie, if you can hear me now, maybe you could describe some examples of screening criteria or how it would be used.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, okay, making progress. Yeah, so a screening criteria is really a metric for what we're going to use to evaluate our alternatives that we come up with. So, you know, we've attempted to define the problem that we're trying to address in our purpose and need statement. And then for each aspect of our purpose and need, what we need to decide is, how should we measure that? What is the right measurement, and what's the appropriate metric for it? So, for example, you know, we're saying that the current dock doesn't meet seismic standards. So the measurement might be meeting seismic standards. That's what we need to measure. And how do we measure it? How are we going to quantify that against various alternatives? It's meeting that standard, which is a defined design metric. So it's really just taking what we've drafted in the purpose and need and figure out how we're going to measure each of those needs to start comparing our alternatives.
Thanks, Maggie. And this slide on your screen gives sort of more of a definition of screening criteria and what's coming next. So that level 1 screening is more, again, the higher level kind of fatal flaw analysis. And then as we move into level 2, it'll be more detailed, right, Maggie? More getting into specific metrics and honing in on specific characteristics of each alternative.
Yes, exactly. Again, the idea is that level 1 is that higher level. So we'll likely have a smaller subset of screening criteria. It's usually more qualitative based, you know, answering questions like, you know, yeah, what you have shown here, does it meet the purpose and need, yes or no? And then as we advance into level 2 screening and we have a fewer number of alternatives, we might get more quantifiable metrics. Like thinking about our environmental goals, we have a goal to minimize environmental impacts. That's likely in level 2, where we're going to get into more detail on how to quantify. How do we want to quantify and measure those environmental impacts? You know, meeting stormwater goals or water quality standards, things like that. Right away acquisition, things like that. So it'll be much more quantifiable in level 2.
Great, thanks. I see Gary. Welcome, Gary. Nice to see you. Gary has a comment in the chat saying, when we say meet seismic criteria, does that include a discussion about tsunamis? Cascadia 9.0 is interesting, he's saying. So could that perhaps be one of our screening criteria, Maggie, how the dock would hold up in a tsunami?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's part of our purpose statement is meeting seismic and tsunami design standards. So that's what we'll have this discussion about, is knowing that that's one of our purpose statements. What's the standard that we're going to use to measure meeting the project purpose? And it is worth mentioning, I guess, that, you know, our screening criteria ideally should be born out of our purpose and need and our goals. So that should be our starting place. We've all worked hard to identify these problems and the project needs and the context for the project, and then how are we going to measure and address those problems will be the next step.
Great. Michelle, do you have a question or comment?
Sorry, I was on mute. I understand this. I think it's very clear, and I like the incremental approach. This is great. I guess I just have a question, and I realize this might be jumping ahead, but if we go through level 1 and then you're into level 2, and there's some great ideas there, when does cost come in? Because to me, in the kind of the work I do, that's always one of the first things you look at, because that in itself can be a fatal flaw. So at what stage, if you have, you know, is it in level 2 When do you get into actual build cost?
That's a great question. Maggie, do you know the answer to that, or Dave, do you want to jump in?
Well, why don't I start, and then maybe Dave can chime in as well. You know, we have a project goal in there that the project does need to be economically feasible for Washington State Ferries to construct and operate and maintain. So that lays the foundation for tying in the cost piece. Where it comes up in screening, I think, is where we need to rely on input from our advisory group members. Which of our screening criteria should we consider fatal flaw? Is a cost of, you know, for example, is a cost of $1 million a fatal flaw? Those are the questions we're going to have to tackle in level 1 to come to agreement on what defines a fatal flaw, and come up with that key set of fatal flaw criteria. On cost, is it a range? You know, it is a reasonable cost range between, you know, $500,000 and $1 million, for example, that sort of thing. What makes a project reasonable from a cost standpoint? So that's what we'll dive into here in the next meeting.
Mm-hmm. So that will be part of the discussion. That answers my question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else have any questions or kind of comments on where we're headed or this process that we just described? Frank?
Natalie, and I apologize to everybody for asking so many questions. I just have, there's time.
Yeah.
So to Michelle's point, money is a big driver. We don't know what it's going to cost, it sounds like, until this whole thing has gone down a road. And then they could get to the end and they say, oh, well, hey, you know, I guess it's twice as much as money we have, therefore throw it all out and start all over again. At least from our perspective. I doubt David would get that far. But, you know, is there a way to, I got 2 comments. One is there, I'm going to wish to have, want to have, I'm going to come back to that one so I don't forget it. But in going through the purpose and need, I understand, as Maggie was saying, about trying to tie the criteria, the screening criteria to the purpose and need, but in the goals section or in the needs section, it's a bunch of verbiage. There's, how do you tie it to you know, to any one of these things? They're kind of very loose, very large, broad, you know, buckets. I think that if we're supposed to tie things back to that, we need to have more defined things. What does safety mean? I mean, we talk about it in 2 paragraphs, but I mean, there's probably 5, 10, 15 specific items that would achieve safety or satisfy safety. But if we don't know what those are, it's going to be a real back and forth as to how to do that. That's just a comment. Another comment is need to have, want to have. Maybe that could help with the costing part. I mean, I think that the seismic issue is a must-have, right? I think the sea level rise issue is a must-have. I think the electrification, I think that's probably an awfully like to have. But you know, I don't know if there's other things that fall farther down the wayside as you start bringing dollars into this, if those could be, how do we balance those? You know, because I think that you would rather have the docks seismically stable than have, I'm just going to pick a thing, overhead loading. You know, I don't, if it's one or the other, but where do we know that, and where do we get that? Where can we provide that information? And I will not ask another question, I promise.
No, Frank, that's great. I think you're getting a little ahead of where we're going to be. And this is what our next meeting will dive more into the details on the screening criteria and whether the criteria will be ranked or how we'll sort of weigh each criterion against each other. In the chat, just to give another way to sort of orient ourselves, we put a document that shows an example of screening criteria from the Mukilteo Multimodal Terminal Project, which is the last ferry terminal that Washington State Ferries just built and opened. So it's not to say that these are the criteria we'd have for this project, but just gives you a sense of how other projects have handled this and give you sort of an idea of what screening criteria looks like. I know it's a big document, so it might take a minute for you to open it, but you can take a look at that in your leisure. And I also wanted to make sure that everyone knows what an alternative is when we say alternative, or we say we're going to begin to define the list of alternatives. Maggie, do you want to just give everyone a quick sort of description or definition of what we mean when we say that?
Sure. In layman's terms, I would say that at this point in the process, an alternative is any solution. It's a solution of any kind. It could be an operational solution. It could be an infrastructure specific solution. It's any way of addressing any solution that could potentially address the problems that we've outlined.
So in our materials, we kind of interchangeably have been saying solution or alternative. So hopefully that helps you understand what's next. It's just developing the screening criteria and then beginning to develop that list of alternatives that we will screen in that level 1 screening phase. And we have the beginnings of a list of alternatives. Some of them have come from you already in the solutions that you've mentioned in comments you've sent us or comments you've brought up in the meetings. And we've certainly heard ideas or suggestions from members of the community recently and over the years about ways that we could replace the dock, or ideas for operational strategies we could employ, and all of that's going to come to play. And we'll be bringing that list to you and getting your feedback for other alternatives we should add to the list, and then applying that screening criteria. So with that, I know we're nearing the end of our meeting and everyone's had a long day. So if there are any other questions or comments of sort of where we're headed or what the next step of our work is about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Yeah, Marty makes a good comment that Mukilteo example in the chat is kind of hard to open. So we will send that by email. Marty, thanks for that suggestion. So you all can take a look at it. And again, that's not meant to be sort of pointing us to what we're doing for this project, but it just gives you a sense of what screening criteria could be, and gives you an idea of what we're talking about. So with that, I'm going to let Lauren close us out and talk about our next steps.
Yeah, thank you, Hadley. So we just really appreciate the time that you've given us tonight. Looking forward to continuing to work through this process with you. Part of our next steps will be incorporating those final comments into the purpose and needs statement. So we'll be following up on that and with another draft. We're meeting with the executive advisory group tomorrow and the technical advisory group next week. And we'll be presenting pretty much the same information and having really similar conversations with them. And we are also planning community meetings in the coming months. This winter is our goal. So keep thinking about who else needs to be involved in this process, who else we should be talking to. If there are other community groups that we should be briefing in the meantime, please let us know. And if you want to connect with me and talk about how this process has been going, or connect with Hadley and share any other comments or thoughts that you have, just reach out to us using the project inbox as you have been. And then as we just discussed, the next meeting on December 1st, which should already be on your calendars, we'll have an initial discussion of the screening process that we just described and start to look at criteria, start discussing a list of alternatives, and talking more about this next round of community engagement that'll be coming. So I know Hadley already opened it up to final questions, but we do have a few more minutes, so I'll just one more time, any final closing thoughts before we send you off into the rest of your evenings? All right, well, thank you so much. I look forward to hearing from all of you and getting to know each of you. So with that, we will say good night.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you
Thanks,
to our
everyone.
audience members who stuck with us through the meeting. Definitely send us an email if you have questions.
Thanks. And this meeting will be posted online as well for anybody who can see.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.